Amanda Christovich from Front Office Sports. We've had her on when it comes to sports business, and always a way to walk out of the segment knowing more than perhaps when we walked in. She joins us now on 365 Sports. Craig Smoke, David Smoke with her now. Amanda, what was your reaction when you saw the news yesterday about the Big 12 and also the American Conference with naming rights? And then, of course, we'll get to the private equity note as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on again. I honestly kind of laughed a little bit because all of the jokes about, like, you know, selling naming rights to change your conference's name sound a little ridiculous, but in reality, you know, it's a pretty savvy idea. And so is the private equity, which I'm sure we'll get to next. You know, given the fact that at least the power conferences are looking at, you know, millions of extra dollars that they're going to have to find and in their athletic department budgets to start paying players. You know, so while like the jokes are great and it sounds kind of ridiculous, I really do think that, you know, these conferences are going to have to get creative, and the most creative ones are going to be the most successful.
Yeah, it's $2 million you didn't have right beforehand, and that can go a long way in helping to fill out a football roster and whatnot. So yeah, I think we're kind of in the same place as far as that goes. It sounded very wonky originally and very, very weird, but it does make some sense. Now the private equity thing, on the other hand, you're right. That's what we'll get to next here. You're far more well versed in all this. I try to understand it, Amanda, as best I can, but you also, you know, see the immediate reactions of private equity kills everything that it touches, and here's 1,000 examples, and this and that. And then you see the financial folks who are like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. This is why it's okay. This is why it makes sense. Where do you kind of see this, how it makes sense, how it doesn't? Where do you fall on private equity, college athletics, and maybe what the Big 12 is potentially trying to do here?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that the idea that the Big 12 private equity deal is like an ownership stake, right? Where a private equity firm comes in, they offer an infusion of capital, and they buy a certain percentage of ownership into the conference, right? Like they would a league or a team, right? This has become very common in sports, both, you know, domestically and internationally. If you remember a few weeks ago, the private equity deal idea that was on the table for athletic departments, offered by two separate firms, was not an ownership stake. They were just saying, we want to infuse capital into your athletic department, right? And then if you make money with our investment, then you're going to have, obviously, to pay us back. There's going to be, you know, sort of like an escalator, interest, whatever word you want to use. But if you don't make money, you don't have to pay us back. Now, that second version is a lot more high risk for the private equity firms, right? And what the conference is looking at is more high risk for the conference side. I think that the athletic department version might be a little bit more stomachable for the sports world or the college sports world, just because there's no ownership stake there, right? But yeah, I mean, the concern is that you get millions of dollars up front when you sell an ownership stake, but not only, you know, is that bill going to come due one day, but also you're giving the private equity firm a certain level of control into your business decisions. And that's what scares people the most, honestly. It's not even really the big check. It's that the firm comes in and, you know, guts your organization and sells it for parts. So, you know, that's not really a clear answer because, again, it just depends on the industry and it depends on the specific contract and situation. But there are a couple different ideas out there that, you know, look, at least in the short term, they're unsurprising because big-time college sports is basically professional at this point, and private equity has made major inroads into the pro sports world.
So, Amanda, for the side that would be like, hey, we'll invest in if we don't see our money, you know, return right away, that's okay. Would that just be, because that's kind of hard, I'm sure, for anybody to believe that you're not going to be upset, but is it basically like, going in on a stock and it doesn't pan out and like, hey, you cut your losses and that's fine? Is that basically what you're saying as far as that potential option?
Yeah, I mean, look, that is the picture that was painted by the two firms who announced that they were, going to create sort of an arm to offer that.
Right.
Could there be sort of non-cash assets? Could there be, something else? Yeah, but my my rudimentary understanding, right? Because I'm not an expert in private equity finance, but my rudimentary understanding, and some of my friends have helped me understand that is an option that this industry considers. It's high risk for them, obviously, but it's more palatable to someone, like an athletic director who's not used to a corporate entity, telling them what to do. And an ownership stake gets really wonky, at least at the athletic department level, a little less so on the conference level.
Is this similar to what you hear when somebody hires a law firm, let's say for what could be a wreck or whatever it is, any kind of lawsuit, and the attorneys who represent you say, you don't have to pay us if we lose, but then you split am I going in the right direction here?
I mean, I think so in terms of like the risk reward, right? And the other thing that is being offered in that isn't an ownership stake, but it is access, which actually this could be good for the athletic department, which is access to, the quote unquote brain trust of the private equity firm, right? They're not going to force you to do anything necessarily, or so they say, but they're going to advise athletic departments and schools on how to fundraise and, how to make money and how to keep that money, which many athletic departments don't know how to do, despite the fact that they rake in 9 figures a year. I think that's a good analogy, but, it's like that just means that the more successful you are, the bigger your bill is going to be.
So Amanda Christovich, Front Office Sports, with us on yesterday's stories that came out. Is there also at times a misunderstanding that when people, you hear private equity, some who've been a part of it have been a part of business transactions, they get it, they understand it. Is there also a part of it that people don't understand enough about it and they get a little bit uneasy?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think that especially in the last several years, and look, I'm a journalist, right? So looking at it from the industry of media, there's a lot of concern about, a private equity firm coming in, and there are horror stories all over my industry, for example, right? So it's understandable that even if you're not looking at the ins and the outs of the deal, you're going to have legitimate concerns just because of the reputation of the private equity industry and some, people accusing them, rightly or wrongly, of taking advantage of, companies and industries that are bleeding out and, just kind of selling them for parts, like I said. But yeah, there's also a misunderstanding because, look, I can explain this to you all I want, but I don't have the contracts in front of me. These are all exploratory discussions and offers that are public. The nuts and bolts of these deals is really what is going to determine whether or not the athletic department or conference side is going to be protected. And none of us really know what that is. We only know the broad strokes categories of what types of typical deals, are being offered here.
I thought one of the reactions, I had somebody contact me that said, why would Brett Yormark and the Big 12 do this? I mean, what are they doing? They're selling their soul, and yet it's from a fan of a school that left a conference to go to another conference to make more money. And I know it's a different story, a different analogy, but I thought that was a little bit, wait a minute, what do you think your school's doing?
Well, I would agree with you 100% because, a source that I spoke with yesterday basically said that the reason the Big 12 is doing this is to catch up to the revenue that the Big 10 and the SEC are going to be raking in with their media rights contracts. That is the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 reason they're doing this because they recognize they want to play with the big boys.
Yeah.
And And everybody knows that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be tens of millions of dollars per school ahead of everybody else. The Big 12 is number 3. And they, they want to catch up. And Brett Yormark, whether you agree with his approach or not, he's extremely aggressive. He's always been extremely aggressive. He's not interested and frankly doesn't care at all about the sort of, old school, old traditionalism of college sports. He looks at his conference as a company, and he looks at his university presidents as his shareholders, right? I mean, and he just, and this is just me riffing off of like how I've watched him lead the conference the last couple of years. Like, he's running this like a business, and he's making business decisions. He's not interested in purity of college sports, at least when it comes to his conference. Maybe the NCAA lobbying stuff is a different issue. Mm-hmm. But, he's doing exactly the same thing that the schools that left this conference are doing. Absolutely. For sure.
Last thing, and Amanda, we always appreciate the insight, the knowledge what you have when it comes to sports business. Was he chosen at the perfect time? It appears that way. Doesn't mean every decision he's made has been completely like, yes, it's not a celebration every time, but the timing of when he arrived, when Bowlesby walked out the door, to what he did with the contract to get the TV deal to undermine what the Pac-12 was trying to do, and all the way up to right now?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think Bob Bowlesby kind of laid a foundation for him that was a lot more palatable, for example, than perhaps Larry Scott laid for George Kliavkoff, right? To say the least. But yeah, I mean, he came in guns blazing, and he looked at, the TV deal and the money aspect of everything, and he looked at it with a fresh perspective that you hope that someone coming from outside the college sports industry, right? That's why conferences are hiring folks from outside the college sports industry, because they're realizing that the conferences that are, not in all cases, right, but in some cases have been run by these college sports insiders that are obsessed with the ideology of amateurism, that nobody believes still exists, right? And if you believe it exists and you're running your conference that way, you're not going to be very successful, because you're up against conferences that are raking in $1 billion. I mean, so I don't know that he came in at the perfect time, because it could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
But I think that his perspective was needed at that time, where he was dealt a good hand, knowing schools were coming in, the conference was going to survive. But if he didn't act like this was a 5-alarm fire, signing this media deal and ensuring the Big 12 was the number 3 conference of, in the FBS, then I don't think the conference would be where it is. So yeah, I think his aggressiveness paid off big.
Love the segment. Thank you, Amanda. Have a great weekend. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Amanda Christovich, Front Office Sports, on many things when it comes to the naming rights for the conference, where that is, and also a little bit more insight on the private equity, which we don't know, because as she said, she gave us some ideas. But as also she said, we don't have the details of what might even be negotiated. When we come back, Grayson Grundhafer,